The morning sun cast long shadows across the training grounds of Naval Special Warfare Command as Sarah Martinez laced up her boots for what would be the most challenging day of her military career. At 5 feet 4 inches and weighing barely 125 pounds, she looked nothing like the typical candidate who walked through these gates. The other recruits towered over her, their muscular frames built through years of preparation and conditioning. But Sarah had something they didn't know about yet, a fire burning inside her that had been forged through years of proving herself wrong at every turn. Growing up in a small town in Texas, Sarah had always been told she was too small, too weak, too fragile for anything that required real strength. Her high school guidance counselor had suggested nursing or teaching when Sarah mentioned her interest in the military. Her own father, a retired Army sergeant, had gently tried to steer her toward the Air Force, thinking it would be easier on someone of her size. Even her boyfriend at the time had laughed when she mentioned wanting to try out for special operations someday. But Sarah had a secret weapon that none of them knew about. She had been training in secret for 3 years, waking up at 4 in the morning to run through the woods behind her house, doing pull-ups on a bar she had installed in her garage, and swimming laps at the local pool until the lifeguards went home. She studied everything she could find about special operations training, memorizing the physical requirements, and pushing herself to exceed them by 20%. The day she walked into the Navy recruiter's office, she could see the doubt in his eyes too. He was polite, professional, but she caught him glancing at her small frame when he thought she wasn't looking. When she told him about her interest in special operations, he handed her a pamphlet about Navy jobs that might be more suitable for someone with her background. Sarah smiled, took the pamphlet, and then proceeded to do 50 perfect push-ups right there in his office. Basic training had been the first real test. Sarah knew she would be watched more closely than the others, that any sign of weakness would be used as proof that she didn't belong. So she made sure there were no signs of weakness to find. While other recruits complained about the early morning runs, Sarah was already awake, having completed her own workout before reveille. When others struggled with the obstacle course, Sarah moved through it like she had been doing it her whole life. Her drill instructor, Petty Officer First Class Rodriguez, had initially been skeptical. He had seen plenty of small recruits come through who thought determination alone would carry them through the rigorous training. Most of them were gone within the first few weeks. But there was something different about Martinez. She never complained, never made excuses, and never asked for special treatment. More importantly, she never quit. The first time Rodriguez really noticed her was during a particularly brutal training exercise in week 4. The recruits were carrying full packs through a swamp simulation, trudging through knee-deep mud and water for miles under the blazing sun. One by one, the bigger recruits started falling out, overcome by heat exhaustion or simply unable to continue. Rodriguez expected Martinez to be among the first to drop, but as the day wore on, she just kept moving forward. When they finally reached the end point, Rodriguez counted heads and realized that Martinez wasn't just still moving, she was helping carry the pack of another recruit who had collapsed from exhaustion. She had somehow found the strength to not only complete the exercise herself, but to help someone twice her size make it through as well. That night, Rodriguez pulled her aside. "Martinez," he said, "I don't know what you're made of, but it's not the same stuff as everyone else here." Sarah just nodded and asked if there was anything else she could work on to improve her performance. Word started to spread about the small recruit who couldn't be broken. Other instructors began to take notice, and Sarah found herself being watched with a mixture of curiosity and respect rather than doubt. But she knew this was just the beginning. Basic training was designed to weed out those who couldn't handle military life, but it wasn't designed to prepare someone for special operations. The real test would come when she applied for the Navy's special operations programs. Sarah had her sights set on something that had never been done before. She wanted to attempt SEAL training. Not the support roles that women had been allowed to fill, but the actual SEAL pipeline that had been the exclusive domain of men since the program's inception. When she submitted her application, the response was swift and predictable. A meeting was arranged with a panel of officers who would review her request. Sarah knew this was more than just paperwork. This was her chance to prove that she deserved the opportunity to try. The day of the meeting, Sarah walked into a room filled with decorated officers, their ribbons and insignia telling stories of decades of service and countless deployments. At the head of the table sat Colonel James Harrison, a legend in special operations circles whose reputation extended far beyond the Navy. He had been brought in specifically to evaluate unconventional candidates, those who didn't fit the traditional mold, but might possess the unique qualities needed for special operations. Colonel Harrison looked up from Sarah's file as she entered. His weathered face showed no emotion as he gestured for her to take a seat. "Petty Officer Martinez," he began, "your training scores are impressive. Your instructors speak very highly of your determination and performance. But I'm sure you understand that determination alone isn't enough for what you're asking to attempt." Sarah met his gaze steadily. "With respect, sir, I'm not asking for anything to be given to me. I'm asking for the chance to earn it." The other officers shifted in their seats, exchanging glances. One of them, a Navy captain, leaned forward. "Martinez, the physical requirements for SEAL training are designed for candidates with certain physical characteristics. The average SEAL candidate is significantly larger and stronger than you are. How do you propose to overcome that disadvantage?" Sarah had prepared for this question. "Sir, I believe that strength comes in many forms. Yes, I may not be able to carry as much weight as someone who is 6 feet tall and weighs 200 pounds, but I can carry my own weight plus some. I can move faster and more quietly than larger candidates, and I can fit into spaces that others cannot. Most importantly, I can endure. I've spent the last 3 years training specifically for this opportunity, not just physically, but mentally." Colonel Harrison studied her for a long moment. "Tell me about your training, Martinez. What exactly have you been doing to prepare?" Sarah described her daily routine. The 4 a.m. runs through increasingly difficult terrain, the hours spent in the gym focusing on functional strength rather than bulking up, the swimming sessions that had built her cardiovascular endurance to levels that exceeded the minimum requirements by significant margins. She talked about the mental preparation too, the visualization exercises, the study of special operations history and tactics, the way she had conditioned herself to push through pain and exhaustion. "I've also been working with a former SEAL who lives in my hometown," she continued. "He's been helping me understand not just the physical challenges I'll face, but the mental ones as well. He's taught me that the biggest battles in special operations training happen inside your own head, and I've been preparing for those battles just as much as the physical ones." The room was quiet for a moment. Then Colonel Harrison leaned back in his chair. "Martinez, I'm going to be honest with you. The failure rate for SEAL training is over 70%, even for candidates who appear ideal on paper. The instructors will not make allowances for your size or gender. If anything, you'll be watched more closely and held to an even higher standard than the male candidates. Are you prepared for that?" "Yes, sir," Sarah replied without hesitation. "Are you prepared for the possibility that no matter how hard you train or how determined you are, your body might simply not be capable of meeting the physical demands of the program?" "Sir, I'd rather try and fail than never try at all, but I don't plan to fail." Colonel Harrison exchanged a look with the other officers. "There's something else you need to understand, Martinez. This isn't just about you anymore. If we allow you to attempt this training, you'll be carrying the hopes and expectations of every woman who dreams of serving in special operations. You'll also be facing the skepticism of those who believe women don't belong in combat roles. That's a heavy burden to carry on top of what is already the most challenging military training in the world." Sarah nodded. "I understand, sir, but I think that burden exists whether I'm carrying it openly or not. At least this way, I have the chance to do something about it." The meeting continued for another hour, with the officers grilling Sarah on everything from her motivation to her understanding of what SEAL training entailed. They asked about her family's reaction to her goals, her backup plans if she failed, and her ability to handle the intense scrutiny that would come with being the first woman to attempt the program. Throughout it all, Sarah remained calm and confident, answering each question thoughtfully and honestly. She knew this was about more than just her physical capabilities. They were evaluating her mental toughness, her maturity, and her ability to handle pressure that would make most people crack. Finally, Colonel Harrison called for a brief recess. As the officers filed out to deliberate, Sarah was left alone in the conference room. She looked out the window at the training grounds where other candidates were going through their daily routines, and she tried to imagine herself among them. The doubt that she had worked so hard to suppress began to creep in around the edges. What if they were right? What if her size really was an insurmountable obstacle? What if she was setting herself up for a very public and humiliating failure? But then she remembered why she was here. She thought about every person who had told her she was too small, too weak, too different to succeed in a man's world. She thought about the young girls who might be watching, wondering if they could ever dream of doing something like this themselves. She thought about the warriors who had come before her, who had faced their own doubts and fears but had pushed forward anyway. When the officers returned, Colonel Harrison's expression was unreadable. He sat down and looked directly at Sarah. "Martinez, this panel has decided to recommend that you be given the opportunity to attempt BUD/S training. However, there will be conditions. You will undergo an additional month of pre-training to ensure you're as prepared as possible. You will be monitored closely throughout the process, not to interfere with your training, but to document your progress for future reference. And if at any point you or your instructors determine that you cannot continue safely, you will be removed from the program immediately." Sarah felt her heart pounding, but she kept her voice steady. "Thank you, sir. I won't let you down." "Martinez," Colonel Harrison said, standing up, "I want you to understand something. This decision wasn't made because we think you'll definitely succeed. It was made because we think you've earned the right to try. What you do with that opportunity is entirely up to you." As Sarah left the building that day, she knew that her life had just changed forever. In a few months, she would be standing on the beaches of Coronado, facing the most challenging training program in the military. She would be surrounded by men who had been training for this moment their entire lives, and she would have to prove that she belonged among them. But for the first time in her life, someone with real authority had looked at her and seen potential instead of limitations. Colonel Harrison had seen something in her that even she wasn't entirely sure was there yet. Now it was up to her to prove that his faith hadn't been misplaced. The extra month of pre-training would begin in 2 weeks. Sarah spent those 2 weeks saying goodbye to the life she had known and preparing for the challenge ahead. She knew that once she walked through the gates at Coronado, there would be no going back. She would either emerge as one of the most elite warriors in the world, or she would join the ranks of those who had tried and failed. But as she packed her gear and prepared to report for pre-training, Sarah Martinez was ready for either outcome. She had already won the most important battle, the right to fight. The pre-training facility at Coronado felt like stepping into another world. Sarah arrived at 0500 hours on a Monday morning in March, her sea bag slung over her shoulder and her stomach tight with nervous energy. The building was already buzzing with activity as other candidates prepared for what would be the most intense month of preparation any of them had ever experienced. Sarah was assigned to a barracks room with 3 other candidates who would be starting BUD/S training at the same time. As she walked in, the conversation stopped. Her roommates, all men who looked like they could have been carved from granite, stared at her with a mixture of surprise and uncertainty. "I guess you're Martinez," said the tallest one, extending his hand. "I'm Johnson, from Texas, like you." His handshake was firm but not crushing, and his tone was neutral, not hostile but not exactly welcoming either. "Davis," said another, a compact man with the build of a wrestler. "California." He nodded, but didn't offer to shake hands. The third man, who looked like he could bench press a small car, just grunted and went back to organizing his gear. "Thompson," he said without looking up. Sarah set her bag on the empty bunk and began unpacking. The silence was awkward, but she had expected this. She knew that her presence would make some people uncomfortable, not necessarily out of malice, but because it represented change in a world that had been the same for decades. So, Johnson finally said, "You're really going to try this?" "I'm going to do this," Sarah corrected, hanging up her uniforms. Thompson looked up for the first time. "Look, no offense, but most guys don't make it through BUD/S. What makes you think you can?" Sarah had heard this question dozens of times already, but she knew it would keep coming. "Same thing that makes any of you think you can, I suppose. Training, preparation, and refusal to quit." Davis laughed, but not unkindly. "You know, they're going to try to break you in the first week, right? The instructors are going to be all over you." "Good," Sarah said, surprising them. "I'd rather face the worst they have right from the beginning than have them go easy on me and then ramp up the pressure later." The conversation was interrupted by the sound of boots in the hallway and a voice bellowing, "All candidates to the courtyard in 2 minutes. Move, move, move." The next month would be a blur of physical conditioning that pushed every candidate to their absolute limits. The pre-training program was designed to prepare them for BUD/S, but it was also a final screening process. Those who couldn't handle pre-training would never survive the real thing. Their lead instructor was Master Chief Petty Officer Williams, a man who had been through 3 combat deployments and had been training SEAL candidates for over a decade. He was known for his ability to spot weaknesses and exploit them until candidates either overcame them or broke under the pressure. On the first day, Williams gathered all 24 pre-training candidates in the courtyard. His eyes moved slowly across the group, studying each face, each posture, each sign of confidence or doubt. When his gaze fell on Sarah, it lingered for just a moment longer than with the others. "Candidates," Williams began, his voice carrying easily across the space. "You are here because someone thinks you might have what it takes to become a Navy SEAL. Over the next month, we're going to test that theory. Some of you will prove them right. Most of you will prove them wrong." He began pacing back and forth in front of the group. "The physical standards you will be held to are not negotiable. The mental toughness required is not something we can teach you. You either have it or you don't. And the commitment necessary to succeed is absolute. If you have any doubts, any reservations, any backup plans that you're secretly counting on, I suggest you leave now and save yourself some pain." No one moved. "Outstanding," Williams said with a grim smile. "Let's find out what you're made of." The first week was a systematic assault on every physical weakness the candidates possessed. They ran until their legs felt like rubber, swam until their lungs burned, and did calisthenics until their muscles screamed for mercy. Sarah found herself struggling with some exercises that came easily to her larger teammates, particularly anything that required upper body strength in proportion to body weight. But she also discovered advantages she hadn't anticipated. During the long runs, her smaller frame allowed her to maintain pace with less energy expenditure. In the water, her swimming technique and endurance kept her near the front of the pack. And when it came to tasks requiring agility or the ability to fit into confined spaces, she outperformed candidates who were twice her size. Master Chief Williams watched it all with keen interest. He had been skeptical when he received word that a female candidate would be joining pre-training, not because he doubted women's capabilities in general, but because he knew the specific demands of SEAL training better than anyone. He had seen hundreds of strong, motivated men fail to meet those demands. But Martinez was proving to be full of surprises. During the second week, the candidates were subjected to a particularly brutal water exercise known as drown-proofing. With their hands and feet bound, they had to survive in the deep end of the pool for 20 minutes, using only subtle body movements to stay afloat and breathe. It was a terrifying experience that broke many candidates psychologically. The feeling of helplessness, the constant threat of drowning, the need to remain calm while every instinct screamed panic. It was too much for some of the strongest men Williams had ever trained. Sarah approached the exercise with characteristic methodical preparation. She spent extra time in the pool the night before, practicing breath control and visualization techniques. When the time came, she slipped into the water with a calm that surprised even Williams. 20 minutes later, When the exercise ended, Sarah was one of only 8 candidates who had completed it without requiring assistance. More importantly, when Williams reviewed the underwater footage later, he saw that she had maintained better form and composure than candidates with twice her muscle mass and military experience. Martinez, Williams called out after that evening's training session. "Walk with me." They strolled along the beach as the sun set over the Pacific. Williams was quiet for a long time, and Sarah began to wonder if she had done something wrong. "You know," Williams finally said, "I've been training SEAL candidates for 12 years. I've seen every type of person you can imagine come through here. Big guys, small guys, college athletes, farm boys, city kids, officers, enlisted, you name it." Sarah waited for him to continue. "The thing is, most people think they know what makes a good SEAL. They think it's about size or strength or how tough you grew up. But I've seen huge guys quit on the first day of Hell Week, and I've seen guys who look like they should be working in accounting become absolute warriors." He stopped walking and turned to face her. "What I'm trying to say is that I'm starting to think the people who approved your application might have seen something the rest of us missed." Sarah felt a mixture of pride and pressure. "Thank you, Master Chief. But I'm still just trying to prove I belong here." William smiled. "That's exactly what I mean. You're not here because you think someone owes you a chance. You're here because you think you've earned one. That's the right attitude." The third week brought new challenges that tested the candidate's ability to work as a team under extreme stress. Sarah found herself facing a different kind of obstacle: some of her teammates' unconscious assumptions about her capabilities. During a boat crew exercise, her team was tasked with carrying a heavy inflatable boat over their heads for several miles across difficult terrain. The boat weighed over 400 pounds, and it required perfect coordination among all 6 team members to move it safely and efficiently. Initially, her teammates tried to position Sarah in spots where she would bear less of the weight, thinking they were helping her. But Sarah quickly realized that this actually made things harder for everyone. When she wasn't carrying her full share, the weight distribution was uneven, making the boat harder to control and causing her teammates to overcompensate. "Stop," Sarah called out during one particularly difficult stretch. "This isn't working." The team set the boat down, and she could see frustration on several faces. They were falling behind other boat crews and risking penalties that would affect all of them. "Look," Sarah said, "I know you guys think you're helping me by trying to carry more weight, but you're actually making this harder. I can carry my portion. I've been training for this just like you have. What I need is for you to trust me to do my job so you could do yours." Johnson, who had become something of an unofficial team leader, looked uncertain. "Martinez, no offense, but if you can't handle the weight and we fail this exercise, we all pay the price." "Then, let's not fail," Sarah said simply. "Give me a fair share of the weight and let's see what happens." They repositioned themselves with Sarah carrying an equal portion of the load. The difference was immediate. With the weight properly distributed, they could move more smoothly and efficiently. Sarah's position also allowed her to spot obstacles and navigation points that the taller men missed. By the end of the exercise, they had not only caught up with the other boat crews, but had finished in second place overall. More importantly, Sarah had earned something that couldn't be taught or demanded: the trust of her teammates. That night, Thompson approached her during chow time. "Martinez," he said, settling down across from her with his tray, "I owe you an apology." Sarah looked up, surprised. Thompson had been the most distant of her roommates, rarely speaking to her except when necessary. "I've been treating you like you were a liability," he continued, "like something we had to work around instead of work with. That wasn't fair, and it wasn't smart. You've proven you can pull your weight." "We're all here for the same reason," Sarah said. "We all want this just as badly." "Yeah, but it's more than that. You've got something that a lot of us don't. You've got nothing to prove to yourself. Most of us are here because we want to know if we're tough enough. You already know you are." The final week of pre-training brought the most challenging exercises yet. Candidates were pushed to their absolute physical and mental limits through sleep deprivation, extreme physical demands, and constant pressure from the instructors. This was designed to simulate the stress they would face during the notorious Hell Week of actual BUD/S training. Sarah found herself drawing on reserves she didn't know she had. When her body screamed for rest, she focused on the goal ahead. When the instructors tried to get inside her head with psychological pressure, she remembered every person who had told her she wasn't strong enough and used their doubt as fuel. During one particularly grueling night exercise, the candidates were required to complete a series of tasks while carrying heavy packs through muddy terrain in near-freezing water. Several candidates had already dropped out from hypothermia or exhaustion, and others were showing clear signs of distress. Sarah was struggling too. Her smaller body mass meant she was losing heat faster than her teammates, and the weight of the pack was taking a toll on her shoulders and back. But she had learned something important during her 3 years of preparation: the difference between discomfort and actual danger. She was uncomfortable, cold, tired, and sore, but she wasn't in danger. Her body was still responding to commands, her mind was still clear, and her heart was still pumping strong. So she kept moving forward. When Johnson stumbled and nearly fell face first into the freezing mud, Sarah was there to catch him. When Davis started showing signs of confusion from exhaustion, she helped guide him through the navigation points. And when the exercise finally ended 6 hours later, she was one of the few candidates still moving under her own power. Master Chief Williams watched her help her struggling teammates to the extraction point, and he realized something important. The question wasn't whether Martinez could survive SEAL training. The question was whether SEAL training was ready for someone like her. The pre-training graduation ceremony was simple but meaningful. Of the 24 candidates who had started the program, only 16 remained. They stood in formation as Master Chief Williams addressed them one final time. Candidates, you have successfully completed pre-training. You have proven that you have the basic physical and mental capabilities necessary to attempt BUD/S. But understand this: what you just been through is a gentle introduction to what awaits you. BUD/S will test you in ways you cannot imagine. It will push you past every limit you think you have, and then demand more. He paused to look each candidate in the eye. Some of you will not make it. That's not a reflection of your worth as people or as sailors. It's simply the reality of what we're asking you to do. But for those who do make it through, you will join the ranks of the most elite warriors in the world. Williams turned specifically to Sarah. Martinez, you have exceeded every expectation we had when we agreed to let you attempt this program. You've proven that heart and determination can overcome physical disadvantages. But the real test is still ahead. After the ceremony, Sarah found herself standing alone on the beach where she would soon begin BUD/S training. In just 2 days, she would join Class 234 and begin the 6-month journey that would either make her a Navy SEAL or add her name to the long list of those who had tried and failed. She thought about the journey that had brought her to this point, the years of secret training, the doubters she had faced, the moment Colonel Harrison had given her the chance to prove herself. She thought about her roommates who had gone from seeing her as a liability to respecting her as a teammate. She thought about Master Chief Williams, whose approval meant more to her than any medal or commendation ever could. But mostly, she thought about the 16 women who had written to her after news of her acceptance into pre-training had leaked to the media. They were military women serving in various capacities around the world, and they had all said essentially the same thing. They were proud of her for trying, regardless of the outcome. Sarah realized that Thompson had been wrong about one thing. She did have something to prove, not to herself, but to everyone who would come after her. She was carrying the hopes and dreams of every woman who had ever wondered if she was tough enough, strong enough, brave enough to serve in combat. As the sun set over the Pacific, Sarah Martinez stood on the beach and made a promise. She would give everything she had to succeed. She would push through every barrier, overcome every obstacle, and refuse to quit no matter what. And if she failed, it would not be because she hadn't tried hard enough or wanted it badly enough. In 2 days, She would find out if her everything was enough. But standing there in the fading light, with the sound of waves crashing against the shore and the lights of Coronado glowing in the distance, Sara Martinez had never felt more ready for anything in her life. The real test was about to begin. The first day of BUD/S training began before dawn with the sound of instructors banging on trash can lids and screaming for Class 234 to get outside in 30 seconds. Sara had been awake for an hour already, unable to sleep from nervous energy, but she still felt the shock of the sudden chaos as 68 candidates rushed to form up in the courtyard. The instructors moved through the ranks like sharks, looking for any sign of weakness, any excuse to single someone out for special attention. When they reached Sara, they paused just long enough to make it clear they were watching her, but they didn't say anything. She had expected harassment, verbal attacks, attempts to rattle her confidence. Instead, she got something worse, complete professional indifference, as if she were just another candidate who would probably be gone within a few weeks. Instructor Jameson, a lean man whose eyes seemed to catalog every movement, addressed the class for the first time. Candidates, welcome to the most challenging military training program in the world. Over the next 6 months, we will push you beyond every limit you think you have. We will break you down and build you back up. Most of you will not finish. This is not a failure of the program. It is the purpose of the program. He began walking slowly in front of the formation. Look to your left. Look to your right. Statistically, only about 20 of you will earn the right to wear the trident. The rest will find other ways to serve your country, but you will not be Navy SEALs. Sara found herself standing next to Rodriguez, a tall candidate from New Mexico who had been a college football player, and Kim, a Korean-American from California who had served 2 deployments as a Navy explosive ordnance disposal technician. Both men nodded at her briefly, the kind of acknowledgement that said they would judge her on performance, not assumptions. The first few weeks of BUD/S were a relentless assault on every aspect of the candidate's physical and mental capabilities. The days began at 0500 with physical training that included running, swimming, and calisthenics that pushed each candidate to their limits. Then came instruction in combat diving, land warfare, and demolitions. The days didn't end until after 1800, and even then, candidates were expected to maintain their gear, study for exams, and prepare for the next day's challenges. Sara quickly learned that her pre-training experience, while valuable, had only scratched the surface of what BUD/S demanded. The pace was relentless, the standards unforgiving, and the pressure constant. Every day, more candidates rang the bell that sat in the center of the courtyard, the symbol of surrender that meant they were dropping out of the program. But Sara also discovered that her preparation had given her something crucial, the confidence that she could adapt and overcome. When the instructors demanded longer runs at faster paces, she found ways to improve her stride efficiency. When the swimming requirements pushed her cardiovascular system to its limits, she focused on technique and breathing patterns that maximized her performance. Most importantly, she learned to embrace the suck. That was the phrase the instructors used to describe the philosophy of accepting discomfort, pain, and exhaustion as temporary conditions that didn't affect your ability to complete the mission. Sara found that her years of training in secret, of pushing through doubt and pain without anyone to encourage her or witness her efforts, had prepared her for this mindset better than she had realized. The first major test came during the 4th week with the introduction of log PT. Each boat crew was assigned a telephone pole that weighed over 400 pounds, and they were required to carry it, lift it, and manipulate it through various exercises while the instructors screamed instructions and critiques. Sara's boat crew had evolved since pre-training. Johnson was still there, along with Rodriguez and Kim, plus 2 new additions. Martinez, no relation despite the shared surname, from Arizona, and Walsh from Boston. They had learned to work together effectively, but log PT was different from anything they had faced. The weight of the log was distributed among 6 people, but it still required tremendous strength and coordination. Sara found herself struggling more than her teammates. not because she couldn't carry her share, but because the height difference made it difficult for everyone to grip the log at the same angle. "Martinez is screwing up our leverage," muttered Martinez during a brief rest period. "We need everyone at the same height to lift this thing efficiently." Instructor Patterson, who had been watching their crew struggle, walked over. "Problem, gentlemen?" he asked, his voice dripping with false concern. "No, Instructor," Johnson answered quickly. "Really? Because it looks like your team is having some difficulties with basic coordination. Maybe someone doesn't belong here." Sarah felt the eyes of her teammates on her. This was the moment she had been dreading, the point where her presence would become a liability that affected others. But Kim spoke up before she could respond. "Instructor, we need to adjust our technique. Give us another shot." Patterson smiled coldly. "Oh, you want another shot? Outstanding. You'll get plenty of shots. In fact, since you're so confident, your crew gets to demonstrate the next exercise for everyone else." The next exercise involved lifting the log overhead and holding it there while doing squats. It was brutal under normal circumstances, but doing it as a demonstration while the rest of the class watched added psychological pressure that made everything harder. Sarah's crew huddled briefly to discuss strategy. "Look," Walsh said quietly, "we need to work with what we have. Martinez, can you handle a full share of the weight?" "Yes," Sarah said without hesitation. "Then, we adjust our grip to accommodate the height difference. We make it work instead of fighting it." When they moved to execute the exercise, they positioned themselves differently than the other crews had been doing. Instead of everyone gripping at the same height, they staggered their positions so that Sarah could maintain proper form while still carrying her portion of the load. The result wasn't perfect, but it was functional. They completed the exercise without anyone dropping their grip or losing form. More importantly, they had solved the problem as a team instead of looking for someone to blame. Instructor Patterson watched the whole thing with interest. When they finished, he nodded once, the closest thing to approval any candidate had received from him. "Adaptation," he announced to the rest of the class. "When your standard approach doesn't work, you find a new approach. You don't make excuses and you don't quit." Good demonstration. That evening, Rodriguez pulled Sarah aside during the brief period they had for personal maintenance. "Listen, Martinez, I want you to know something. When we started this, I thought you might be a weak link. I was wrong. You're not the strongest person on the team, but you're the most consistent. You show up every day ready to do whatever needs to be done." Sarah appreciated the sentiment, but she was also aware that consistency wasn't going to be enough for what was coming. Week 5 would bring Hell Week, the legendary trial that broke more candidates than any other part of BUD/S. 5.5 days with a total of only 4 hours of sleep, constant physical activity, and psychological pressure designed to push candidates past their breaking point. As she lay in her bunk that night, Sarah thought about the statistics she had memorized. Roughly 60% of candidates who made it to Hell Week would quit during those 5 days. The reasons varied: physical injury, mental exhaustion, hypothermia, or simply the realization that they had reached their limit and couldn't continue. She thought about her teammates and wondered who would still be there at the end of the week. Johnson was strong and determined, but she had noticed him struggling with the mental pressure when things went wrong. Rodriguez was physically gifted, but he sometimes relied too heavily on natural ability instead of technique. Kim was solid in every area, the kind of candidate who was likely to succeed if he could avoid injury. And then there was herself. Sarah knew she would be tested differently than her male counterparts. The instructors would be watching to see if she could handle the extreme sleep deprivation, the cold water exposure, and the physical demands when her body was running on empty. They would be looking for any sign that her gender made her unsuitable for the demands of special operations. But Sarah had a secret weapon that she hadn't shared with anyone. During her 3 years of preparation, she had conducted her own version of Hell Week every 3 months. She had spent 5 days training with minimal sleep, pushing her body to exhaustion, and continuing to perform when everything hurt and her mind begged her to quit. She had done this alone, in the woods behind her house, with no instructors to motivate her, and no teammates to encourage her. She had learned to be her own drill instructor, to find motivation when there was no external source, and to keep moving when stopping would have been easy and unnoticed. The night before Hell Week, the entire class gathered for a brief from the senior instructor, Master Chief Rodriguez, no relation to the candidate. He was a legend in the SEAL community, a man who had served in every major conflict of the past 2 decades and had trained hundreds of successful SEAL candidates. "Gentlemen," he began, then caught himself and glanced at Sarah. "Candidates, you are about to begin the most challenging 5 days of your military careers. Hell Week is not designed to be fair. It is not designed to be comfortable. It is designed to reveal who you really are when everything else is stripped away." He paused to look at each candidate individually. "You will be cold, wet, tired, hungry, and confused. Your body will hurt in ways you didn't know were possible. Your mind will try to convince you that quitting is the rational choice. Most of you will believe it." His eyes lingered on Sarah for just a moment. "But for those who refuse to quit, who keep moving when everything tells them to stop, Hell Week will teach you something invaluable. There's no limit to what you can endure when the mission depends on it." The brief ended with practical information about medical monitoring, meal schedules, and the few rules that govern the week ahead. But Sarah barely heard the details. She was focused on the challenge that lay ahead and the opportunity it represented. Hell Week would either break her or prove once, and for all that she belonged among the elite warriors of naval special warfare. There would be no more questions about whether a woman could handle the demands of SEAL training, because she would have survived the ultimate test. As the candidates filed out to get what sleep they could before the chaos began, Sarah felt a calm settle over her that surprised even her. She had been preparing for this week for 3 years. She had visualized every possible scenario, trained her body to function on no sleep, and conditioned her mind to push through any obstacle. Tomorrow, when the instructors came to wake them with explosions and chaos, when the cold water and endless running began, when her classmates started to quit and ring the bell, Sarah Martinez would still be standing. Not because she was the biggest or the strongest, but because she had something that couldn't be taught or measured: the absolute refusal to give up. Hell Week was about to begin, and Sarah had never been more ready for anything in her life. The only question was whether the program that had been designed for men like her teammates was ready for someone like her. Hell Week began at midnight on Sunday, with explosions that shook the barracks and instructors storming through the building with air horns and blank ammunition. Sarah was already awake when the chaos erupted, but the shock of sudden noise and artificial smoke still sent adrenaline coursing through her system as she rolled out of her bunk and rushed to join the formation outside. The scene in the courtyard was surreal. Floodlights illuminated candidates stumbling around in various states of dress, some still trying to put on boots while instructors screamed contradictory orders. Smoke machines filled the air with artificial fog, while speakers blasted military cadences at volume levels that made thinking difficult. "Welcome to Hell Week," roared Instructor Jameson over the noise. "For the next 5.5 days, you belong to us. You will go where we tell you to go, do what we tell you to do, and keep doing it until we tell you to stop. The only way this ends is graduation or quitting. Choose wisely." The first evolution was a night run through the sand dunes surrounding Coronado. In full gear, carrying boats over their heads, the candidates moved through soft sand that made every step an effort. The pace was punishing, and within the first hour, 2 candidates had already wrung out, overcome by the combination of physical demands and psychological pressure. Sarah found her rhythm early and focused on the fundamentals she had drilled during her preparation: steady breathing, efficient movement, and, most importantly, staying present in the moment instead of thinking about how many hours lay ahead. She had learned during her solo training that the mind could endure almost anything as long as it focused on the current step rather than the entire journey. By dawn on Monday, the class had been reduced from 56 candidates to 49. They stood shivering in the surf while instructors explained the day's schedule. surf torture, followed by obstacle course runs, followed by more surf torture, followed by log PT, with everything repeated until further notice. Surf torture was exactly what it sounded like. Candidates were required to link arms and sit in the freezing Pacific Ocean while waves crashed over them. The water temperature was 58 degrees, cold enough to cause hypothermia if exposure lasted too long. The goal was to push candidates to their limits while medical staff monitored for signs of dangerous heat loss. This was where Sarah faced her first major crisis of Hell Week. Her smaller body mass meant she lost heat faster than her larger classmates, and within minutes of entering the water, she was shivering uncontrollably. The medical corpsman noted her condition and moved closer to monitor her core temperature. "Martinez," he called out after 20 minutes, "you're borderline hypothermic. I need to pull you out." "Negative," Sarah managed through chattering teeth. "I'm still functional." The corpsman looked uncertain, but Instructor Patterson made the decision. "Martinez stays in unless she can't respond to commands or shows signs of mental confusion. Your job is to monitor, not to make command decisions." Sarah forced herself to focus on breathing techniques she had practiced during cold water exposure training. She visualized warm blood flowing to her extremities and used meditation techniques to separate her awareness from the physical discomfort. It was a battle fought entirely in her mind, with her body temperature as the battlefield. After 45 minutes in the surf, the candidates were allowed to exit the water for calisthenics designed to restore circulation. Sarah's teammates immediately surrounded her, using their body heat to help warm her up while she did jumping jacks and push-ups to get her blood flowing. "You okay, Martinez?" Johnson asked quietly. "Fine," she replied, though they could all see she was still shivering. "You don't look fine," Kim observed. "Maybe I should what?" Sarah interrupted. "Quit because I'm cold? Everyone's cold. That's the point." Rodriguez nodded approvingly. "She's right. We're all suffering. The question is whether we're going to let it stop us." The second night brought sleep deprivation that pushed everyone to new levels of exhaustion. Candidates were allowed to sleep in shifts of 30 minutes, while others maintained security watches, but the constant activity and noise made real rest impossible. Sarah discovered that her years of training with limited sleep gave her an advantage here. She had learned to function effectively even when her brain felt wrapped in cotton. During a particularly brutal Wednesday afternoon log evolution, she watched 3 more candidates ring out in the span of an hour. The physical demands were relentless, but what broke most people was the psychological pressure of knowing it would continue indefinitely. There was no clock to watch, no countdown to endurance, just the knowledge that it would stop when the instructors decided it should stop. Sarah had prepared for this too. During her solo hell weeks, she had trained herself to find motivation in the suffering itself. Each moment of discomfort became proof that she was still in the fight. Each wave that crashed over her head in surf torture was evidence that she hadn't quit. The pain became her scorecard. By Thursday morning, Class 234 had been reduced to 31 candidates. The survivors moved through evolutions with the mechanical efficiency of people operating on pure determination. Conversations became limited to essential communications. Movements became economical and purposeful. It was during Thursday's boat races that Sarah truly distinguished herself. Each boat crew was required to paddle their inflatable boat through increasingly challenging surf conditions while racing against other crews. The combination of teamwork, physical endurance, and tactical thinking separated the survivors from those who would eventually ring out. Sarah's crew had developed an efficient paddle rhythm that maximized their boat speed while conserving energy. But, more importantly, they had learned to communicate effectively under stress. When their boat flipped in heavy surf, they executed the recovery procedures they had drilled without panic or confusion. Master Chief Rodriguez, who had been observing the races, noticed something interesting about Martinez's crew. They were finishing consistently in the top 3, not because they were the strongest or fastest, but because they made fewer mistakes and recovered from setbacks more quickly than other crews. "Instructor Patterson," he called out during a brief pause between races, "what's your assessment of Boat Crew 3? Patterson watched Sarah's crew preparing their boat for the next race. Interesting dynamic, Master Chief. The female candidate has become something of a stabilizing influence. When things go wrong, she stays calm and helps the crew work through problems instead of panicking. That's not what you expected when the week started? No, Master Chief. I expected her to become a liability under stress. Instead, she's become an asset. Thursday night brought the legendary Around the World Evolution, a 16-hour odyssey that took candidates to multiple locations around San Diego County for various challenges. They would run on beaches, climb obstacles in the mountains, paddle boats in Mission Bay, and conduct tactical exercises in urban environments. It was designed to be the final test that separated true SEAL candidates from everyone else. Sarah's crew found themselves assigned to a particularly challenging route that included a 10-mile run through Balboa Park, followed by boat operations in the bay. The run began at 2,200 hours, and by the time they reached the halfway point, several crew members were showing signs of serious fatigue. Walsh had developed a severe limp from an injury that was getting progressively worse. Martinez was struggling with dehydration despite the water they had been given. Johnson was still strong physically, but his mental state was deteriorating from sleep deprivation. "We need to stay together," Sarah said during a brief rest stop. "No one gets left behind." "Easy for you to say," Walsh replied through gritted teeth. "Your legs aren't falling apart." "You're right," Sarah acknowledged. "But if we start leaving people behind, we fail as a crew. And if we fail as a crew, we all fail individually." Rodriguez, who had been quiet for most of the night, spoke up. "She's right. We've made it this far together. We finish together or we don't finish at all." They modified their formation so that Walsh could lean on Martinez for support, while Sarah took point to set a sustainable pace. It wasn't fast, but it was steady, and they continued making progress toward their objective. When they reached the boat operations phase, Sarah's maritime experience proved invaluable. She had spent countless hours on small boats during her preparation, and she was able to guide her crew through the navigation requirements efficiently. While other crews struggled with compass bearings and tidal calculations, Sarah's crew completed their assigned route and returned to the extraction point ahead of schedule. Master Chief Rodriguez was waiting for them at the beach. "Boat Crew 3, report your status." Johnson, as the senior member of the crew, answered. "Mission complete, Master Chief. All personnel accounted for." "Outstanding." Martinez, he called to Sarah, front and center. Sarah stepped forward, wondering if she had done something wrong. The Master Chief studied her for a long moment before speaking. "I've been watching your performance throughout this week. You've exceeded expectations in every area that matters. Physical performance, mental toughness, leadership under stress, and, most importantly, the ability to help your teammates succeed." He paused, and Sarah realized that other instructors had gathered around to listen. "I want you to understand something," Master Chief Rodriguez continued. "SEAL training isn't designed to find the biggest, strongest, or fastest candidates. It's designed to find warriors who will never quit and never let their teammates down. You've demonstrated both of those qualities repeatedly." As Friday morning arrived and Hell Week entered its final phase, Sarah felt a strange combination of exhaustion and exhilaration. Her body hurt in ways she hadn't known were possible, and her mind felt like it was operating through a thick fog. But she was still standing, still moving, still fighting. The final evolution was a simple one, a 4-mile run on the beach followed by a brief ceremony to mark the end of Hell Week. Of the 56 candidates who had started Sunday night, only 23 remained. They ran as a group, supporting teammates who were struggling, celebrating the fact that they had survived the ultimate test. When they crossed the finish line, Sarah found herself surrounded by teammates who had become brothers through shared suffering. They had started Hell Week as individuals competing for limited spots in an elite program. They finished as a team that had proven they could endure anything together. Master Chief Rodriguez addressed the survivors with obvious pride. "Congratulations, candidates. You have just completed Hell Week. You have proven that you possess the basic mental and physical toughness required to be Navy SEALs. But remember, this is not the end of your training. This is the beginning. As the brief ceremony concluded and candidates were finally allowed to rest, Sarah reflected on what she had accomplished. She had not only survived Hell Week, she had excelled. She had proven that determination and preparation could overcome physical disadvantages. Most importantly, she had earned the respect of her teammates and instructors not because she was a woman succeeding in a man's world, but because she was a warrior who refused to quit. Colonel Harrison appeared as the candidates were preparing to head to their barracks for their first real sleep in 5 days. He had flown in from Washington specifically to observe the conclusion of Hell Week and to evaluate Sarah's performance. "Martinez," he called out, "a word, please." They walked along the beach where Sarah had stood just weeks before, preparing for the challenge that had seemed almost insurmountable. Now, having conquered Hell Week, she felt like a different person entirely. "I've been receiving reports throughout the week," Colonel Harrison said. "The feedback has been universally positive. You've not only met the standards, you've exceeded them." Sarah felt a surge of pride, but she was too tired to fully process the magnitude of what he was telling her. "There's something else," he continued. "Your performance this week has gotten attention at very high levels. People are starting to believe that women can not only survive SEAL training, but excel in it." They stopped walking, and Colonel Harrison turned to face her. "Martinez, you're not just training to become a SEAL anymore. Whether you wanted it or not, you've become a symbol. The question now is whether you're ready for that responsibility." Sarah looked out at the Pacific Ocean, where she had endured hours of surf torture just days before. She thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment and the journey that still lay ahead. Hell Week was over, but Bud/S training would continue for months. Then would come advanced training, deployment preparation, and eventually operational assignments where her performance would determine not just her own success, but the lives of her teammates. "Colonel," she said finally, "I didn't start this journey to become a symbol. I started it to become a SEAL. If other people want to see symbolic meaning in that, I can't control that. All I can control is my own performance." Colonel Harrison smiled. "That's exactly the right answer, Martinez. Now go get some sleep. You've earned it." As Sarah walked back toward the barracks where her surviving classmates were already crashing into their bunks for the first uninterrupted sleep they'd had in almost a week, she realized that everything had changed. She was no longer the small woman who had been given a chance to try. She was now a proven warrior who had survived the ultimate test and emerged stronger than before. Hell Week was over, but her journey was just beginning. 6 months after Hell Week, Sarah Martinez stood in formation with the 21 other survivors of BUD/S Class 234, preparing for their graduation ceremony. The journey from that first day, when 68 candidates had reported for training, to this moment had been the most challenging experience of her life, but also the most transformative. The months following Hell Week had brought new trials that tested different aspects of their capabilities. Combat diving phase had pushed their underwater skills to the limits of human endurance. Land warfare phase had taught them to think tactically while exhausted and under fire. And the final phase had combined everything they had learned into complex scenarios that simulated real-world special operations missions. Through it all, Sarah had continued to prove that her Hell Week performance was not an anomaly. She had excelled in combat diving, despite initial concerns about her lung capacity and underwater endurance. Her smaller frame had actually been an advantage in some underwater navigation exercises, allowing her to move through confined spaces that challenged larger candidates. During land warfare training, she had discovered a natural aptitude for marksmanship that surprised even her instructors. Her steady hands and ability to control her breathing under stress made her one of the most accurate shooters in the class. When they moved to advanced sniper training, she consistently outperformed candidates who had previous military experience as infantrymen. But perhaps most importantly, Sarah had emerged as a leader within her class. It hadn't happened through any formal appointment or dramatic moment. Instead, her classmates had gradually begun turning to her for guidance during difficult evolutions, trusting her judgment and relying on her calm presence under pressure. The transformation had been noticed by everyone involved in their training. Master Chief Rodriguez had submitted evaluation reports that praised not just Sarah's individual performance, but her positive impact on class morale and cohesion. Instructor Patterson, who had initially been skeptical of her presence, had become one of her strongest advocates. Martinez has redefined what we look for in SEAL candidates, he had written in his final assessment. Physical strength is important, but mental toughness and the ability to inspire others under extreme conditions are more valuable. She possesses both in abundance. The night before graduation, Sarah found herself walking the same stretch of beach where she had stood with Colonel Harrison after Hell Week. So much had changed since then, not just for her personally, but for the entire Naval Special Warfare community. Her success had opened doors for other women who were now beginning their own journeys through the pipeline. 3 women had started BUD/S training in the classes that followed hers. One had made it through Hell Week before being injured during land warfare phase. Another was currently in the combat diving phase of her training. The third had wrung out during the first week, but not before proving that she belonged there long enough to earn the respect of her classmates. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message from her father. Watching the ceremony online tomorrow. Proud of you beyond words. It was a significant change from the man who had once gently suggested she consider the Air Force because it might be easier. As she walked, Sarah reflected on the person she had been when she first arrived at Coronado and the person she had become. The physical changes were obvious. She was stronger, more resilient, and carried herself with the confidence that came from surviving ordeals that had broken men twice her size. But the mental changes were even more profound. She no longer felt the need to prove herself to anyone. The doubt that had driven her initial motivation had been replaced by quiet confidence in her abilities. She had learned to trust her instincts, to lead when necessary, and to follow when appropriate. Most importantly, she had learned that true strength wasn't about overpowering obstacles, but about finding ways to overcome them through intelligence, persistence, and teamwork. The graduation ceremony was held on a perfect San Diego morning, with clear skies and calm seas providing a backdrop for one of the most exclusive events in military training. Family members, distinguished guests, and senior military officials filled the viewing area, while the graduating class stood in formation wearing their dress blue uniforms. Colonel Harrison was present to deliver the keynote address, and Sarah noticed that his remarks focused heavily on the evolution of special operations and the importance of embracing change while maintaining standards. He didn't mention her specifically, but everyone present understood the significance of her presence in the formation. Today's graduates represent the finest warriors our nation can produce, Colonel Harrison said. They have proven through their performance, not their appearances or backgrounds, that they possess the mental toughness, physical capability, and moral character required for special operations. They are not just individual warriors. They are part of a brotherhood that extends back decades and will continue for generations to come. When it came time for the presentation of the SEAL Trident, Sarah felt a surreal sense of culmination. The pin that she had visualized earning for so many years was finally being placed on her uniform. But more than the symbol itself, it was the knowledge of what she had endured to earn it that made the moment meaningful. As Captain Williams, the commanding officer of the training center, pinned the trident to her uniform, he spoke quietly so that only she could hear. Martinez, you have redefined what's possible in this community. Wear this pin with pride, but remember that earning it is just the beginning of your service. After the ceremony, Sarah was surrounded by her classmates for photos and congratulations. Johnson, who had become one of her closest friends during training, pulled her aside for a private moment. You know, he said, when we started this journey, I thought you were either crazy or delusional. I figured there was no way someone your size could make it through SEAL training. Sarah laughed. What changed your mind? Hell Week, I think. Watching you help Walsh when he was injured, seeing you stay calm when the rest of us were losing it. That's when I realized that you weren't here to prove a point. You were here because you belonged here. Rodriguez joined their conversation, along with Kim and several other classmates. "We need to talk about team assignments," Kim said. "Word is that they're going to let us stay together for our first deployment. You interested in joining SEAL Team 5? The question represented another milestone Sarah hadn't fully considered. Graduating BUD/S was one achievement, but being accepted by an operational SEAL team for deployment was another level entirely. These would be the men she would serve alongside in combat, who would trust her with their lives and depend on her to complete missions that could have strategic importance. "Are you sure your team would want me?" Sarah asked, only half joking. "Martinez," Rodriguez said seriously, "after what we've been through together, I can't imagine deploying without you." The sentiment was echoed by the others, and Sarah realized that she had achieved something even more valuable than individual recognition. She had earned the trust and respect of the warriors who knew her capabilities best, the men who had suffered alongside her and witnessed her performance under the worst possible conditions. Later that evening, at the informal gathering that had become tradition for graduating BUD/S classes, Sarah found herself in conversation with Master Chief Rodriguez. The veteran instructor had attended every graduation ceremony for the past 12 years, but he seemed particularly thoughtful about this one. "Martinez," he said, "I want you to understand what you've accomplished here. It's not just about being the first woman to complete SEAL training. You've proven that excellence has no gender. You've changed the way we think about what makes a good SEAL." He paused to take a drink before continuing. "But I also want you to understand what comes next. The teams you'll be assigned have been operating the same way for decades. Some of them will welcome you immediately because your reputation precedes you. Others will need time to adjust to the idea of female SEALs." Sarah nodded. "I'm prepared for that, Master Chief. I've been dealing with skeptics my entire military career." "I know you are, but this is different. In training, your performance speaks for itself. In the teams, you'll be dealing with men who have their own ways of doing things, their own traditions, and their own concerns about how adding women to the mix might affect their effectiveness." Master Chief Rodriguez looked directly at her. "My advice is the same thing that got you through BUD/S. Focus on your job, support your teammates, and let your performance do the talking. The rest will take care of itself." 3 weeks later, Sarah reported to SEAL Team 5 for her first operational assignment. The team was preparing for a deployment to Southeast Asia, where they would conduct counterterrorism operations in partnership with Allied forces. It was exactly the kind of mission she had dreamed about during all those early morning training sessions in the woods behind her house. The team's commanding officer, Lieutenant Commander Roberts, was a veteran of 4 deployments who had specifically requested Sarah for his unit. During her in-briefing, he explained his reasoning. "Martinez, I've read your training reports and spoken with your instructors. I've also talked to your BUD/S classmates who are already serving with other teams. The feedback is unanimous. You're a solid performer who makes everyone around you better." He leaned back in his chair. "That said, this team has been operating together for 2 years. We have established procedures, communication patterns, and trust relationships that have been built through shared experiences. Your job is to integrate into that structure while adding your own capabilities to our mission effectiveness." Sarah's first few weeks with the team were spent in intensive training that was designed to prepare them for their upcoming deployment. She was assigned to a fire team led by Petty Officer First Class Thompson, an 8-year veteran who had served with SEAL teams in Iraq and Afghanistan. Thompson's initial approach was professional but cautious. He assigned Sarah to positions that would allow her to contribute while minimizing any potential disruption to established team dynamics. But as training progressed and he observed her performance, his confidence in her abilities grew. During a particularly challenging exercise that simulated a hostage rescue operation, Sarah's marksmanship skills proved decisive. The scenario required precise shots in low-light conditions, while friendly forces were in close proximity to hostile targets. Sarah's ability to remain calm under pressure and deliver accurate fire allowed the team to complete the mission without simulated casualties. After the exercise, Thompson pulled her aside for feedback. "Martinez, that was outstanding shooting under pressure. Where did you develop those skills?" 3 years of preparation before I even got to BUD/S, Sarah replied. "I knew I would need every advantage I could develop." Thompson nodded approvingly. "Well, it shows. I'm recommending you for advanced sniper training when we get back from deployment. Those skills could be valuable for the team." As their deployment date approached, Sarah found herself fully integrated into the team's operations. Her teammates had moved past seeing her as an experiment or curiosity and now viewed her simply as another SEAL who happened to be female. The transformation had been gradual but complete. The night before they departed for their deployment, Colonel Harrison called Sarah to his office for a final conversation. He had been promoted since her graduation and was now serving in a position that gave him oversight of special operations training and policy. "Martinez," he said, "I wanted to see you before you deployed because I think it's important for you to understand the broader impact of what you've accomplished." He handed her a folder containing letters from dozens of young women expressing interest in military service, particularly in special operations roles. Many of them specifically cited Sarah's example as inspiration for their own goals. "This is just a sampling," Colonel Harrison explained. "We're seeing unprecedented interest from qualified female candidates across all the special operations communities. You've opened a door that was locked for generations." Sarah looked through the letters, feeling the weight of responsibility that came with being a symbol whether she wanted it or not. "Sir," she said finally, "I hope they understand that this isn't about proving anything to anyone else. It's about proving something to yourself." Colonel Harrison smiled. "I think they do understand that. And I think you've given them the most important gift possible, the knowledge that it can be done." As Sarah prepared for her first deployment as a Navy SEAL, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. She had started as a small woman with a big dream and impossible odds. She had endured doubt, skepticism, and physical challenges that had broken men twice her size. She had proven that determination and preparation could overcome almost any obstacle. But most importantly, she had learned that true strength wasn't about being the biggest or the toughest. It was about refusing to quit when everything told you to give up, supporting your teammates when they needed help, and finding ways to succeed even when the odds were stacked against you. The girl who had been told she was too small and too weak to succeed in a man's world was gone. In her place stood a Navy SEAL, ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. As Petty Officer Sarah Martinez boarded the aircraft that would take her and her teammates to their first operational deployment, she knew that she was no longer fighting to prove herself worthy of respect. She was fighting to live up to the respect she had already earned. The journey that had begun with doubt and determination was now continuing with confidence and purpose. And somewhere in a small town in Texas, a young girl who had always been told she was too small for her dreams was reading about a Navy SEAL who proved that being too small was just another obstacle to overcome.